Good morning. My name is Ray Offenheiser, and I'm the director of the Pulte Institute for Global Development here at the University of Notre Dame's Keough School of Global Affairs. I'm delighted this morning to welcome you to this morning's event to mark the 50th anniversary of BRAC, one of the world's foremost anti-poverty NGOs. BRAC is the largest and one of the most prestigious NGOs that perhaps you may have not ever heard of. This is perhaps not surprising, as it is a southern-based NGO that emerged out of a liberation war and multiple years of famine in faraway Bangladesh. However, over its 50-year history, BRAC has literally lifted tens of millions of poor families out of extreme poverty. Blending a deep appreciation for local context with smart economics and business acumen, it has developed highly innovative programs that tap and develop the capabilities of the poor at the village level and empower them with agency to address their own problems on their own terms. BRAC began humbly as a response of a few dedicated individuals to a major typhoon that wiped out many communities along the Bangladesh coast in 1970. But it really emerged as it is today as a response to the massive famines in Bangladesh that followed its liberation war from West Pakistan in 1972, which displaced millions of Bangladeshis. BRAC has grown enormously over the last 50 years, and today it has 120,000 employees and works in 9 countries in Africa and Asia. Today, BRAC runs one of the largest microcredit programs in the world. It has created a digital ATM system that serves poor villages across Bangladesh. It has also established and runs the most prestigious private university in Bangladesh today with both undergraduate and graduate programs. Challenged by international donors to become financially self-sufficient, BRAC created 12 large social enterprises that funnel their profits back into BRAC's poverty work. These enterprises operate at a very large scale in crafts, dairy, seed production, and distribution and banking, all serving directly or indirectly the needs of the poor. BRAC also operates large urban and rural health programs across Bangladesh, and its graduate program in public health trains young public health professionals from across the world through experiential learning and state-of-the-art public health practice. Its village education program that once operated in 38,000 villages across Bangladesh is today a model that is now being replicated by BRAC in Afghanistan and by numerous governments in other countries across the globe. And today, BRAC's ultra-poor graduation program is looked to by the World Bank as one of the most exemplary programs for addressing the needs of the poorest of the poor. Every great organization has a great leader or leaders. BRAC's founder, Sir Fazle Abed, was one such extraordinary leader. Trained as an accountant in the United Kingdom, he abandoned his role as director of Shell Oil's operations in Bangladesh to devote his life to poverty alleviation. BRAC is his creation, and it's both his life and BRAC's achievements that we're celebrating here today. Like BRAC, he is one of development's most extraordinary leaders that you have never heard of, but we hope to change that this morning. We're fortunate to have with us in person and by video several individuals who know BRAC well and have served it in various capacities over many years. This morning, we want to introduce you to BRAC, the story of its founder, Sir Fazle Abed, as told by Scott MacMillan in his new biography of Sir Abed, entitled Hope Over Fate. Scott's remarks will be followed by a panel of friends and colleagues who work or have worked with BRAC. I might also add that I am currently the chair of BRAC USA and a board member of BRAC's global board. And from 1990 to 1996, I was the Ford Foundation country representative in Bangladesh and chaired BRAC's International Donor Consortium. We might ask, why are we celebrating BRAC here today at Notre Dame? Well, it happens that the Holy Cross Order has a long and deep history in Bangladesh, having been in the country since the 1800s. It operates secondary schools and parishes across the country that are supported annually by Bengal bouts here on campus. But most importantly, when Sir Abed was creating the first board of BRAC, he assembled a group of his closest friends, including Father Richard Tim, a Notre Dame graduate and lifelong resident and teacher at Notre Dame College in Bangladesh. So there's a very direct connection between the founding of this amazing organization and a member of our Notre Dame community. There's much more to this story, and sharing that with you this morning is the purpose of this event. To begin, I'm delighted to introduce Scott MacMillan, who is the Director of Learning and Innovation at BRAC USA, an affiliate organization of BRAC, where he has worked since 2011. A former journalist, he served as a speechwriter for Sir Fazle Abed the founder of BRAC prior to his death in 2019, and continues to work closely with the organization in the current capacity. And Scott, most importantly, is the author of Hope Over Faith, the book, the bio of Sir Fazle Abed that we're going to be discussing this morning. We're going to begin the program, however, with a short video about BRAC, and then Scott will begin to offer comments on his book about Sir Fazle Abed, and that will be followed by a panel with a number of friends of BRAC to conclude the program. So thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you really enjoyed the program and learned a great deal about BRAC this morning. Thank you very much.
He's been called one of the unsung heroes of modern times. Fazle Hasan Abed was more than just a mild-mannered accountant. As a young man in the early 1970s, he had a corporate multinational job in finance. He could have stayed on that career path and led a very comfortable life. Instead, in 1972, confronted with war and natural disaster in his homeland, he quit his job and founded BRAC, originally the Bangladesh Rehabilitation Assistance Committee.
People died because they were poor. And I thought that the kind of life I was leading at the time, working for Shell Oil, I thought that this life is not really something that I'd like to pursue. I'd like to pursue something else.
In the decades to come, BRAC would become massive, reaching 100 million people in Asia and Africa. It is known as one of the world's most effective anti-poverty efforts. Abed avoided the limelight. He preferred to let his work speak for itself. Microfinance, community healthcare, education, humanitarian aid, and more. What links these diverse programs together is Abed's lifelong conviction that hope itself can help people overcome poverty. He saw that poverty was not just a lack of money or skills. People remained trapped in poverty, in part because they thought things could never change. They thought it was their fate to be poor. So Abed started by changing this mindset. He gathered people in small groups to talk about their problems so that together they could confront the injustices that held them back. They began to understand that a better world was possible, and that they themselves had the power to build it. This is the power of hope. Millions of people planning for the future, saving and investing. Girls filling up classrooms, women starting their own businesses. BRAC is known for its entrepreneurial approach to tackling poverty. It is known for being efficient and effective, but it is far more than that. The legacy of Sir Fazle Hasan Abed is the triumph of hope over fate.
Human life is for a short period on Earth, and I would like that short period that each of us have to be as happy and as productive and as meaningful as possible.
Thank you, Ray, for the intro. Thank you, Pulte Institute, for hosting me. Thank you all for coming. So, my name is Scott MacMillan. In the year 2011, I was a freelance journalist at the time, and I was traveling around Africa, and I heard about this organization called BRAC. And I remember the first time I heard it, somebody told me about a job that was opening up at BRAC USA based in New York. And BRAC is hiring, BRAC is doing this. BRAC had just started working in Africa at the time, and it was a meaningless syllable to me at the time. Like, what is this organization? What is this thing called BRAC you're talking about? And of course, I went and I looked it up. And I had the same reaction that a lot of people have when they first hear about BRAC, when they hear about BRAC for the first time, which is, how come nobody ever told me about these guys? I mean, it was really quite remarkable, the work that they were doing. BRAC was and is, by many measures, the world's largest non-governmental organization with about 100,000 employees, working in about a dozen countries, serving about 100 million people, most of the population of Bangladesh. And it was, as you saw from the video and from Ray's introduction, working in a host of different areas. So anyway, long story short, I ended up getting that job. And it was a job in communications. So just a little side note, fast forward about 2 years into the job, I remember meeting an acquaintance who was just a friend of a friend and chit-chatting. Oh, what do you do? Oh, I work in a nonprofit. It's based in Bangladesh. It's actually the world's largest NGO. And of course, my spiel is pretty well practiced at this time. You know, it's the world's largest NGO. It's the world's best kept secret. Nobody's ever heard of us. We do all these activities, but it's not a household name, 100 million people. And the guy says, man, you got to fire whoever handles your publicity. Anyway, I managed to hold on to that job for a little while longer and ended up working very closely with this gentleman as his speechwriter for a number of years. The time I spent with Abed, I sat across from him at his desk and at the 19th floor of the BRAC high rise in Dhaka, and I sat with him in hotel rooms in New York and Des Moines and Miami, wherever he happened to be traveling. If he was giving a commencement speech or he got some honorary degrees, he asked me to, work on his speeches. And the time I spent with him, he also told me stories from the previous 8 decades of his life. A couple of things I noticed about Abed. One, his story was really quite remarkable. 2, he didn't really like to tell his story very much, not to groups of people. He wouldn't mind me saying this right now. If he were here today, he was not exceptionally good at marketing himself. He was pretty bad at marketing. He was not a great public speaker. Right, he was really good one-on-one, as some of you who have met him will attest to. He was the kind of guy that if you asked him a question, he would give a very thoughtful answer. And he was the kind of person that, when he spoke, you sort of leaned in to hear what he had to say. But in terms of, marketing communications, not really his thing. He really believed very strongly in keeping your head down and focusing on the work and letting the work speak for itself, which is a remarkable quality, given that if you run a nonprofit, I think it's usually a given that you have to be good at self-promotion. You have to be out there telling your story, right? No, that wasn't really his thing. And yet BRAC managed to achieve all this success. And it was very well known, at least within the development sector, if not with the public at large. Another thing I noticed, the way that he told the BRAC story was not really amenable to, as they say, an elevator pitch, right? You heard Ray give a brief overview in his introduction, one of the world's largest providers of microfinance, but it's not a microfinance institution. It does so much more. Tens of thousands of schools, mostly girls in the classroom, about a million students in schools at a given time. It was, for a time, the world's largest non-religious, non-governmental education provider, largest in the world, right? The community health workers, tens of thousands of community health workers serving people in their neighborhoods with essential health goods and services, the 12 social enterprises that generated all this revenue. Oh, did we mention there's a university, then the graduation program that BRAC pioneered, and there's a bank. And by this time, the elevator, do you remember the elevator? People have gotten out. It's gone to the top floor and down again, maybe started up again. So the window for the elevator pitch is over. I noticed as I spoke to him that there was an underlying unity, if you will, to the work that Abed was doing, going all the way back to the 1970s. And it was this idea that hope itself could help people overcome the poverty trap. And that's what I try to capture in the book's title, Hope Over Fate. So I'm going to tell you just a couple of stories from the book. I'm not going to read from the book. I'm told I'm not very good at that. So I'm just going to tell you some stories. I mentioned that Abed didn't really love telling stories about himself. So in the spirit of a man who did not love telling stories about himself, I don't actually start with an anecdote about Abed. I start with an anecdote about a woman named Shohida Begum. Shohida Begum lives in the far north of Bangladesh, up in the there's a map in the air in front of me right now to look at it. There's a panhandle of northern Bangladesh that sticks up into India, and that's where the mighty Brahmaputra River flows in from the Assam hills and starts, begins its sort of long journey through the deltaic floodplains of Bangladesh. Hundreds of kilometers from the sea, it's already 7 miles wide, and the land is shifting islands made of silt and sand. This is really Bangladesh itself. It's an exceptionally fertile land. It's a flood-prone patch of land the size of Iowa, on which 2% of humanity subsists. The land is very fertile, but life is also exceptionally uncertain. And Shohida Begum lives on one of these many tributaries of the Brahmaputra way up in the far north. She's very sure-footed in her flip-flops. She walks a mile to her 3 acres of land to gather fodder for the cow. One thing I notice about her, she is exceptionally loud when she talks. Does anybody remember, any soccer fans in the audience that remember the 2010 World Cup and those plastic horns, those vuvuzelas? Right. Her voice is like a vuvuzela. So I'm not going to imitate it right now because I may break the sound system. Okay. And she says to me, "You're not from my land, so you don't understand what life was like here. People could barely eat. They could barely put clothes on their back. They wore nothing but scraps." And she proceeds to tell me her life story. She was married off at the age of 11, which was quite common and is still now. Child marriage is still quite common in Bangladesh. Unlike many women or many girls in that situation, she actually had a very good relationship with her husband and her husband's family. And she describes it as a relationship of love. She uses that word in the Bangla language as it's translated to me. She said, "We were very, very poor. I mean, we're sitting outside our house, which is about the size of a pickup truck. It's a mud brick dwelling about the size of a pickup truck." She says to me, "We were very poor, but there was a lot of love." And he made hats for a living. He took dried palm fronds and reeds and wove them into these conical shaped hats that he would sell in the market for a few pennies or the equivalent thereof. And that was their only source of income for many years until the year 2001. July 2001, she said he came back. It was an exceptionally hot day, and he came back from the market gasping for breath, and he collapsed in front of their hut, and he died. It could have been heat stroke. It could have been any number of underlying medical conditions that basic care could have taken care of, but had it been available. But as things were, she was left penniless, no source of income, destitute. She began begging for food. She describes not having eaten for 3 days at one point. She went to the local brickyard. There were a lot of brickyards across Bangladesh popping up that were sort of feeding the growing urbanization of the country at the time with these big kilns. And they needed people to just carry mud on their head. And that's what she did all day long, back-breaking work, carrying mud on her head to a kiln and back and forth and back and forth. And the most she ever made in a single day was the equivalent of about 50 cents. Most days, she said, I made half that. One day, folks from an organization called BRAC came to her village. And I'm not going to go into the details of the program that she entered, but it was the first iteration. She was the first cohort of the first pilot of what became known as the graduation program or the graduation approach. And The intervention consisted of, among other things, the intervention consisted of a gift of goats and weekly visits from a caseworker. These weekly visits get very important. She tells me a really tragicomic story about her first gift of goats. 3 goats become 12 goats, and then one day the fox came. And the name of the chapter is The Fox That Killed My Goat. So spoiler alert, the goat doesn't really do too well in that encounter. She said, when the fox killed my goat, I don't know where the tears came from. They had remained childless. So this was almost the first time she had ever experienced anything akin to motherhood. The goats, she named them all. They came when they were called. They slept in her bed. They didn't pee or poop in the bed. They were so well behaved, she said. And when the fox killed my goat, I started beating the fox, but I couldn't save the goat, and I started to cry, and I didn't know how I couldn't stop crying. And the caseworker came and said, it'll be okay. This is going to be okay. You're going to work through this. We're going to get more goats, right? And finally, the caseworker had to say, you have to stop crying. You're making everybody here really, really upset. But she kept on crying and crying. Okay. A few things sort of occur to me here, right? Her confidence is a little bit misleading, right? Rising from poverty is like walking on the edge of a knife. Any setback, a bad harvest, a single dead goat seems like a calamity. And I also wonder, this confidence. I mean, she speaks with the confidence of somebody who has overcome great odds. Where does it come from? Well, the material changes in her life have been vast, relatively speaking. I mean, she now has 3 acres of land, not just goats. She also has 12 chickens, 2 cows. Last time I visited, she had electricity installed in her home, and she also bought a milk cart that she rented out for additional income to other people in the village. So she's done pretty well for herself versus where she was. So it stands to reason that, having risen from extreme poverty, she would be a bit more confident. One thing led to another. There is actually a growing body of research, economic research, that posits the causality might actually flow in the opposite direction. It is possible that she rose from poverty because she was confident. And one of the reasons that she was so confident is she had this newfound hope that was given to her by the hand-holding, the coaching that she received from that BRAC caseworker who said, we're going to work through this, right? We have a plan. You can think about the future. We're going to work through this. And that's what I try to explore in the book. That is the idea of hope over fate. It is not her fate to be poor. There are things that one can do, large and small, to change one's condition in life. Now, that is a potentially misleading concept. I should get that right out there. It is potentially even dangerous because it risks creating the impression that somehow Shohida's poverty was self-inflicted, right? It was her downcast attitude that was keeping her down the entire time. And all she really needed was a good pep talk, grab her by her shoulders and shake her and say, lady, stop being so fatalistic and you'll rise out of poverty. Anybody that knows anything about the conditions she was in, the exploitation she was facing, and the conditions of millions more like her will know that is plainly not the case, right? You need services such as access to credit, agricultural inputs, fertilizer, educational opportunities, training, basic skills and livelihood training, financial literacy training, access to healthcare is so vital, and the list goes on. But without that, also addressing some of the underlying psychological mechanisms at work, that deep-rooted despair that is really rooted in generations of lived experience. Without addressing that, it is very likely that people, even with all those material things and all that training, people might be very likely to slide back into a state of extreme poverty. It is my opinion. It's not BRAC's opinion. I'm telling you this is my opinion. I think this is where BRAC succeeds, where a lot of poverty efforts have failed in the past. They treat both of those things. So as I speak to Abed more and more, I realized that this theme, hope over fate, or hope and agency over fatalism and despair, that this is a theme that is not, I mentioned that there's a lot of recent economic research about this. I'm thinking about the work of people like Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2019, positing that hope, there's a certain power in hope, the power of hope. Actually, for Abed, this goes all the way back to the 1970s, and it really was the driving conviction of his entire life. So I'm going to tell one more story, and then we can chit chat about the implications of this. So the year is 1974. Abed has already been working for a couple of years in, again, another northern part of Bangladesh, up in the northeast corner. And the despair, the poverty is grinding, and he's already had a number of major setbacks. But he's begun experimenting with a new way of teaching people basic skills like reading and writing. And it's based on the methodology of a Brazilian educator by the name of Paulo Freire. It's based on dialogue and discussion. So it goes something like this. Just one word, one day, one word a day. Let's just focus on one word a day in small groups, and we'll talk about what this word really means in the context of our daily lives. So the first word is the word for house, bari, B-A-R-I in the Bangla language. And because the people can't read or write, the word is written, and there's also a simple drawing of a house. So picture it here. What does the house really mean? What does this word really mean? Well, it's not just a house, it's a home. It's also means sort of the patch of land around my house is included in that word. And also my livestock and my family. Are all houses the same? No, some are bigger than others. I have a hole in my thatch and it rains right through at night. Why don't you fix it? Because I am poor. Why are you poor? Because my wages are so low. Well, who sets your wages? And through these discussions, people begin to scratch at the surface of the barriers they face and the nature of poverty itself. And the discussions get quite animated. Okay, second day, tiger. Every Bengali person knows what a tiger is, even if they haven't seen one in the zoo or seen one in the wild, right? What does the tiger represent? I think we have a small enough group that people can shout out. What does the tiger represent? Anybody? Fear, strength, kind of the untamed state of nature. It's a fierce thing. It's from the wild, right? You see a tiger, go back to your house, go the other direction, right? And then the teacher, who is really more like a facilitator at this point, asks, can a tiger build a house? And the people say, no, of course not. A tiger can't build a house. If it rains, the tiger can only run under a tree to keep itself dry. Can you build a house? And the people say, of course, yes, we can all build houses if we have some tools and the material. We can all build houses for ourselves. And the teacher / facilitator says something like the following. So the tiger is different from the human being because the tiger can only adapt himself to nature, whereas human beings can adapt nature to suit their own needs. In this process of human beings adapting nature to suit their own needs through their own creative activities is the process of civilization itself. And whether or not we realize it, we all participate in that process. So can any of you volunteer a few things that you've done today or yesterday to do some creative activities that you've done recently? And somebody might say, well, actually, I repaired the thatch in my roof, or I planted some seeds. I harvested some rice. Yes, we plant seeds in the soil so we can stay put, not wander around in search of food. That is our choice. And somebody might say, I actually worked on the flood wall. I repaired the flood wall to direct the flow of rainwater to irrigate the fields properly. And slowly, the point starts to become clear. society was theirs to own and to shape, not something given to them. And poverty itself had been made by human beings, and it could be unmade by them too. And the way Abed told me that story, it was as though there was a transformation that took place in people's consciousness and people's outlook. And they really began to think about the future in a new way. They began to plan for the future. They began to think about things they could do, large and small, to bring about a better future and how they could work together. Remember, 100 tigers cooperating with one another still cannot build a house. But men and women working together can do many things. It was as though the first spark of self-worth and hope had been lit. The road ahead would be very, very long, to be clear, right? And it would involve providing services that had been denied to people for so long: the credit, the training, the agricultural inputs, the education, the healthcare, the list goes on. But none of that would mean a thing if the people did not first believe in the possibility of change. And from those sparks of hope and self-worth, it was like flames began to burn. And once those flames began to burn, they were very, very difficult to extinguish. And when Abed told me that story, I said he wasn't very good at telling stories, but when he told me that story, I remember the first time thinking to myself, wow, somebody ought to write a book about that. So here we are. I would invite Dean Appleby and Michael and Samya, our guest panelists, to join me on stage for a discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to everyone. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to make some fairly brief introductions of our panelists. As you've just heard from Scott MacMillan, he's the Director of Learning and Innovation at BRAC USA, which is an affiliate organization of BRAC, where he's worked since 2011. Formerly a journalist, he served as a speechwriter, as we've heard, of Sir Abed, the founder of BRAC, prior to Abed's death in 2019. We also have with us, we're pleased that we have Dr. Samya Huck, an anthropologist and professor at the Department of Economics and Social Sciences at Kroc University, Dhaka. Samya is also Dean of the General Education Department and has been given a significant assignment that you might want to describe for us in helping Kroc University integrate its curriculum. So I hope you can say a few things about that. Samya's current research includes the cultural activism of Bengali Muslims of East Pakistan and the impact of secondary, secular, and madrasa education on gendered norms and practices as part of the Initiative on Education, Gender, and Growth in Asia. She also coordinates the Kroc University, Georgetown University Speakers Forum and is engaged in ethnographic research on faith-inspired development actors in 2 districts of Bangladesh through her cooperation with the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Joining us via Zoom, welcome, Dr. Mashtak Chowdhury, who joined the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University in 2004. Welcome, Dr. Chowdhury. He has international experience working in diverse situations such as Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Thailand, China, and Ethiopia, and currently serves as vice chairperson of BRAC in Bangladesh. Dr. Chowdhury is the founding dean of BRAC University's James P. Grant School of Public Health in Bangladesh. He also founded the Research and Evaluation Division of BRAC, an NGO which, as you know, is particularly concerned with poverty alleviation, education, and health. Dr. Michael Bowler is with us. He's a Notre Dame alum, the year before I graduated in 78, year from 77, and associate professor of global studies and world languages at Winona State University in Winona, Minnesota. Michael is a past vice president and longtime trustee of the American Institute of Bangladesh Studies. As the first junior fellow of the then newly formed American Institute of Bangladesh Studies, he had the good fortune of becoming a BRAC research associate, conducting his doctoral research in the Village Study Program in Manmarpur, Upazila, Southwest Bangladesh. Dr. Mashtak Chowdhury BRAC has been and continues to be another key interlocutor that Michael has worked with. So let's get to our discussion after those introductions. We'll start with Scott. I'll ask each of you some questions that we have prepared, but this is a conversation. So please, everyone can speak up. And Dr. Chowdhury, you don't need to wait to be recognized. Speak anytime you'd like. Good. So I want to start with Scott and ask you to elaborate in a way. You've provided some of the answers to these two questions. You're speaking a great deal about the book, about BRAC, about Sir Abed. And what are the takeaways you want audiences to grasp from the book and from your presentation? You gave us a few here. You want to elaborate on those, and then a similar question, a related question. You also gave us a little bit of insight into Sir Fazle Abed. In your presentation, you said he wasn't a great speaker. He wasn't very good at self-marketing, and you gave us some anecdotes. The question would be, what are the characteristics, in a way, and of course, reading the book will help us understand that even more. But what are the characteristics of Sir Abed as a leader, an organizational, this incredible accomplishment? We want to hear more about what it was about him that led to this really stunning success, in addition to what you've already told us. So we can all chip in, but please start.
I feel that others, including Mashtak Bhai, worked with him for so many years and decades, will have much more to add to this. So I'll be brief. The first question, the key takeaway, I really struggled actually with the title, what to call the book. And it was through a lot of reflection and a lot of conversation, that didn't just pop out at the beginning, this idea of hope over fate. It really came from a lot of discussion and reflection with Abed when I kind of pieced it all together. Oh, this is sort of what you've been doing from the very, very beginning. So that's the key takeaway. It's the biography of a man, to be sure, right? It begins with him being born and it ends with him dying and covers everything in between. It's a biography and a remarkable man, in my opinion. It is also the story of how he built this organization. It's the story of BRAC. There are key whole chapters even where Abed's not really even on stage, so to speak. It's things that he set in motion. Other people, including Mashtak, were the main actors. But it's also the biography of an idea, right? And it is this idea that hope itself can help people break the poverty trap. And I try to weave that through his life from the very beginning to the end. So that's kind of the key takeaway. Now, you asked about the man himself. He was an accountant. I said to him once, you like numbers more than stories, don't you, Abed? And he kind of corrected me. It's the numbers that tell the stories. He was a man of limited praise. His daughter, Mara, said recently, when you did something really well. Now, when you did something well, he said, not bad. When you did something really well, he said, not too bad at all. he had a way of inspiring people that worked for him to do things that other people would have thought was impossible. And I think that that was the curious thing, is his hiring strategy even was based on what he saw about people's potential rather than their experience or their resume, right? It occurs to me, there are all sorts of, we could theorize about how BRAC managed to achieve the scale that it did. And there could be geographic reasons for that. It could be related to, Abed's managerial skill. But I think part of it had to do with, he surrounded himself with people that were relatively inexperienced. He himself was not experienced when he started BRAC at doing relief or development work, but he surrounded himself with a lot of people that had no previous experience other than working for BRAC. And so when he asked them to do things that other more experienced people would have said, nope, that's impossible, like scale up the education program to reach a million kids, they didn't have enough experience to push back. They didn't know any better, so they did the impossible, right? So I'll stop there.
Good. Dr. Mashtak, would you like to add anything to that portrait of Sir Abed?
Sure. Let me start by thanking the Pulte Institute for hosting this launch of the book, and I'm really grateful to Ray and Dean Appleby for inviting me to this launch ceremony. Coming back to the question of Abed, I think he had tremendous power to attract people, as has been said already, that he attracted all the great minds, not only within Bangladesh but also from outside as well. So I joined BRAC when I was when BRAC was 5 years old, and I found that Abed, although he was an accountant, but when I interacted with him, I found him that he's a kind of a very person who has knowledge of everything. I myself had my degree in statistics, and I was amazed to see how much statistics he knows. So that was one of the reasons which actually kept me in BRAC for 42 years. So that's one of the sort of Abed's sort of attraction which need to remember. The other thing is he was a great manager. He knew how to manage people, how to think ahead of time. So just to give you an example, in the early 80s, education was not in the international agenda, but he thought that the 90s, the decade of the 90s, is going to be a decade of education, and then he decided to start some a pilot program on children's education. So by the time 1990 came, BRAC was fully ready with its own model of primary education. So that's how he was a kind of he could foresee what's going to come. The other thing that he had is he was a great believer in the power of women. He always thought that the change, if you want to change the society, it has to come through women, and that's why if you look at BRAC programs, all the BRAC programs are women-centered, and that was one of the reasons why BRAC has done probably well, which also means that Abed was right. And finally, the point that I want to make is that he was also a great believer in research. Which really helped. I mean, I was the director of research, and because of his support and his sort of his understanding and ready acceptance of the research results, the Research and Evaluation Division was able to really become big and contribute tremendously to the development of the organization. I'll stop there.
Can I follow up on that, your last point about research?
Mm-hmm.
And ask how he went about building research teams. What resources did he draw upon? How did he recruit? Can you get us a little bit into the details of the research program?
Yep. Well, I mean, he also believed in autonomy. So when he thought that BRAC needs research, he gave the research department, and I was in charge of that, all the autonomy really to plan research and then execute them. So what you did was that the first challenge was to develop research capacity within the organization, and we set up a separate independent outfit within the organization. And we started training people on research. Unfortunately, the universities that we have in Bangladesh, they do not really teach research. So we had to really train people in the field how to do research. And the other point that I would make about research and Abed's contribution to that is that the resources the financial resources is a very important part of doing research. And it is not always easy to find research for an organization like BRAC at that time. But he found a good formula. So what he did was that in every development program that BRAC initiated, a small proportion of that, 2 to 4%, of the total project money was earmarked for research, which really allowed us to sort of do whatever research we wanted to do. And we really sort of used that opportunity to do research in order to help the intervention program improve and improve and improve. So those are some of the things that I think the support that we had from Sir Abed was very instrumental in really building BRAC as a evidence-based organization.
Wonderful. They chose a good moderator for this panel because I'm sincerely naive in my questions. And here's one. What is the relationship? We could talk a little bit about the relationship with BRAC and its research programs and the university. Samya, would you start that conversation?
Sure. So I think just to backtrack a little bit, perhaps, and give everyone more of a context. So BRAC had this fantastic experience of launching and running its research and evaluation division, which was very strong, and the evidence that was generating was going back into the BRAC programs towards sustained growth. And I think the research experience at BRAC was to come into the university in a big way. But I think the genesis of the university and why Sir Fazle came to think about it is very important. The primary education program, which had been around for almost 15 years at that point, and doing all the integrated development work at the rural level, I think led Abed to realize that that at the rural level, and even at the national level, the elite are important, right? That at the rural level, the structures of oppression that keep people, inequality and poverty in its place, the elite, of course, have a role to play in that. And the rural programs had shown that to bring them in was the way to go forward, actually, right? To do this kind of collective development. So if you kind of extrapolate from that to think about the national context, then what to do about the nation's elite who are not necessarily in rural areas, and could the BRAC understanding and the BRAC ethos and the BRAC experience shape that, shape the delivery of higher education towards the creation of a new generation of elite, and by elite, I mean doers, the next level of civil servants, bureaucrats, entrepreneurs, teachers, educators, and what have you. So I think from there, the idea was that the university was going to have a strong research foundations that were going to generate evidence for practice, for the practice of development, both at BRAC and beyond, and whoever wanted to come on board. But it was also, this evidence-based, knowledge-based thinking, and of course, its outreach to the community through community service, through civic engagement, was also going to transform the next generation of Bangladeshi citizens in not just doing development, but doing in general, differently. And in that, of course, the research component was important. The James P. Grant School of Public Health, which Dr. Chowdhury was the inaugural dean of, it does cutting edge research and teaching on public health from the Global South. We have the Kroc Institute of Governance and Development, that offers a development studies program, does research on all kinds of areas from graduation to ultra poor, research around poverty. We have the BRAC Institute of Education, which looks at education models, does research around education, and also has launched programs beyond BRAC schools that are play-based. That was very essential and foundational to the primary education program. And of course, Abed's view was that the university was going to be a liberal arts university, where an interdisciplinary approach, thinking holistically about complex issues to come up with good solutions to complex problems, was going to be very important. Now, for a variety of reasons, Bangladesh is sort of the inheritor, the higher education model is the inheritor of a different kind of system of education, which, at the time hadn't really understood the liberal arts model, the sort of the government convening bodies under which the universities had to operate. But I've come quite a bit, since then. And, the liberal arts model and what I do at General Education in terms of fueling and firing the core curriculum, and all kinds of ways in which, let's say, an understanding of global health or public health could have a reflection, an understanding of, development, poverty, and solving problems could have a curricular reflection, and sort of really excite students to above and beyond what their departmental or their disciplinary undertaking is, that it could excite students to go out there, to, build communities, to look at community problems, and to understand the flourishing of themselves as the future citizens of Bangladesh that is very much integrated to community life. So you change, you grow, because your community changes and your community grows. So that's sort of really, I think, the foundational ethos of BRAC that we try to bring into the university. I know it's a little above and beyond your question in terms of just research per se, but yes, that's sort of, where we think about research at all levels, development, poverty, but much more.
Thank you. A lot of threads to pick up on here. Dr. Chowdhury mentioned earlier that the beginning of the research was in rural context, and they were still trying to figure out what research meant in that context. And Professor Arbola, you were very much, as I understand, part of that original research. Tell us about that, the context for it, and the research itself, and how it got off the ground.
Yeah. So a couple things. First, Mashtak Bhai, told you about the research and evaluation division at BRAC. And Scott mentioned Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, Nobel laureates in economics, for the work they did, Poor Economics. Please understand that what Mashtak Bhai BRAC were doing years before their book was actually what they talk about in their book. Just at the time, BRAC was one of the only NGOs doing research on programs that were supposed to lift people out of poverty. And they were even probably doing some randomized control trials that are also profiled in the work of Duflo and Banerjee. And so they were known as a learning organization back then, just to go through the annals of the history of development studies. I was a Notre Dame undergrad. I played ice hockey here. That's why I came to Notre Dame. I was shocked by everything going on here, even back in the 1970s, in terms of my professors, my mentors. The name James P. Grant has come up several times, a very good friend of Father Hesburgh's, because he was Grant was one of the first chairman of the Overseas Development Council, which Father Hesburgh was on the president of their board of directors. I had a lot of ideas about silver bullets and magic development organizations when I was here. And when I went to Bangladesh first, thanks to the support of Father Hesburgh, and he put me in touch with Father Tim, another name that's come up. One of the first things Father Tim did was to send me out to rural Bangladesh to experience BRAC and their non-formal education, the Paulo Freire method. I thought it was absolutely fabulous. Of course, being young and naive, had not thought through that there would have to be something beyond conscientization, like really helping poor people economically. And so you saw the microcredit come about. Give you an example of the research. I was involved in the village study program that's been mentioned in Moni Rampur, a small Upazila, small district in southwest Bangladesh, where village study program BRAC researchers were working. The village that I did research in had a number of women, most vulnerable women, because they were widows. Their husbands had died when they were quite young, young children, very vulnerable. In addition, there were lots of poor people in this village, materially poor people, who were not benefiting from the BRAC programs. They were untouched. They didn't have enough money to get involved in the microcredit. The widows, of course, being women, were kind of standoffish about getting involved. The village is about a third Hindu, and they were left out in many ways. And these are all the things that kind of the data that led to BRAC understanding that there was something they would call the ultra poor, and to design programs not only for them, but Scott mentioned the graduation too. So that would be an example of where the research has gone and beyond that.
Good. Thank you. I have a question. I'll start with Scott. You mentioned that BRAC has now expanded globally and is present in 12 countries, I think is the number you gave us. I'd like you all to say something about that. How did that expansion occur? What kinds of collaborations are there between BRAC Central and these 12 countries on health care, on education, on research? Tell us a bit about, maybe Scott, if you could start, about that global expansion.
In 2002, after the fall of the last Taliban regime in Afghanistan, Abed saw millions of refugees flowing back into the country. And he sort of said, well, that looks familiar, right? That was the situation of Bangladesh in 1971, 1972, when BRAC started. And by that point, BRAC was well established enough and had many decades of experience, working in rural areas and in a host of different areas that he thought, I think we can teach the world something. I think we can bring something to the world. And made the decision to begin expanding internationally. It was very interesting because when I spoke to him and others about it, it kind of came out of the blue. Right? Nobody told me about even his closest advisors didn't quite see it coming. Right? It's like, we're doing this, make a few phone calls. You're going to Kabul. What? Me? Yes, you. And it, had. I tell the story in the book, and the first sort of foray into international territory almost had the elements of a caper, right? And they were welcomed with open arms. They were brought to the front of the line. There was like a Korean NGO that had been waiting for weeks and weeks. I think it was Korean. I don't know. There was another NGO, Western NGO, or another non-Muslim country that had been waiting for weeks and weeks for their certification, and they were brought to the front of the line. And there was a story when the education minister saw them, he sort of, this big burly man, you have come from the land of Tagore, right? There was a great connection there at the time, and that's launched a series of, it was Afghanistan after the war, it was Sri Lanka after the Indian Ocean tsunami. And then they launched in Africa in 2006, 7, 8, in Uganda, Tanzania, what became South Sudan, Liberia, Sierra Leone, all these very difficult contexts. The experience of BRAC expanding internationally has been very interesting. There's in some ways, they haven't yet achieved the sort of nationwide impact that they have in Bangladesh. Certain things have been very successful in some, like microfinance has been very successful, except in some areas where it's not, right? South Sudan and Afghanistan, for various reasons, they had to shut down the microfinance programs there. It's very difficult for market-based solutions to gain traction in places where basic security is still a concern. I work very closely with a girls' empowerment program in East Africa, which has achieved tremendous success, as confirmed by several RCTs, not East and West Africa, in reducing teenage pregnancy rates, raising income of adolescent girls. I mean, really stellar work. And we're working with the government to try to incorporate that into the formal education system somehow. So there've been really remarkable areas. In other areas, the progress has been, Abed said to me, it hasn't been as easy as I thought it would be. He didn't use exactly those words, but it's been an experience, put it that way. And I try to go into that in the book. One of the things that I really enjoyed about writing this book, even though I work for BRAC, I had a free hand to write what I saw, blemishes and all. Right. And I don't think Abed would have wanted it any other way.
I'm not entirely surprised that it's taken a while and that it hasn't gone as easily as he thought. As Dean, usually when I say, let's do this like this, it doesn't quite happen right away. Mashtak, would you add to that profile of the global expansion from your perspective, especially with regards to research connections?
Sure. I remember it was in 2003 and 4 when I was at Columbia, and I was part of this Millennium Project, which was headed by Jeffrey Sachs. And I was coordinating a task force on MDG goals 4 and 5. And in doing that, what I learned was the dire need for development programs in Africa. And our knowledge about Africa in Bangladesh wasn't that good. And what we found was that there were a lot of small sort of successful programs being implemented in Africa, but those programs are not scaled up. So there were problems in scaling up in Africa. And I thought that BRAC has a sort of a good opportunity there. And when I returned home, I told Abed Bhai that we must move to Africa. And then in 2006, Abed Bhai sent Aminul Alam, who was my senior colleague, and me to Africa to see to explore the possibility of BRAC moving into Africa. And we went to 3 countries, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. And we were there for about 2 weeks. And it became very clear to us that BRAC has a great opportunity to be of assistance, to replicate some of the experience that we have in really doing programs at scale. And that's led BRAC to move into Africa. And now, if you look at the country where BRAC is present, in most of this country, BRAC is already the largest NGO there. So this has happened because of the vision of the ethos that we have, that small is beautiful but large is necessary. So that has worked well in Africa, and also we thought that it's very important that the experience of BRAC in everything should be tried there, and we set up also a research unit there. So we do have a research center based in Kampala, which is doing research in various African countries where BRAC is present. And it's not only devoting attention to BRAC programs only, but also in contributing to the local research needs. So one of the things that we did in Uganda was starting a kind of a youth watch, and we did large surveys to find out what are the experience of the youths in Uganda. So that really helped to influence the Ugandan government take up new programs, and also led to some of the larger programs that BRAC also started, such as a scholarship program, which was a big scholarship program, which was funded by the Mashtak Foundation. So we have both the intervention program and also research happening in Africa.
Good. Thank you very much, Michael. Clearly, there are a lot of opportunities that BRAC has taken advantage of in this, and great progress. Do you see any risk to BRAC in this kind of expansion?
Sure, there's tremendous risk, but let me just point out the historical significance of this. Before, it was all organizations coming from the West, CARE, Oxfam, even UNICEF to a certain extent, United Nations, but still coming from the West. This represents a real change. And who would have thought 30 years ago, 50 years ago, that the largest sustainable development non-governmental organization would come out of Bangladesh. And also there's the example of the Grameen Bank even applying microcredit in the United States. So it's tremendously historically significant. But yes, for all those reasons, if BRAC would fail, there's big risk because of now BRAC's reputation. But I don't think they're going to fail because they have the lessons from the global South, the importance of education, the importance of how to deal with urbanization and materially poor people moving from rural areas to urban areas, their work with women.
Good, thank you. Samya, I'm going to ask you a question along these lines, but I'd like you to also tie in to your response, your own work on Islam and on faith-based organizations and development. And I'd like just you to say a bit about that work in and of itself, but also the global Islam in a sense, and the connections that BRAC might have with Muslim communities around the world that might play into the kind of global expanse. But we really want to hear a little bit about your own research.
Thank you. So if I can just dovetail a little bit from where Michael ended. So I think that BRAC internationalizing is really an important story. And it's a story that we are very proud of from Bangladesh. It's a great story out of Bangladesh, perhaps not known as much yet, maybe will be now after the book. But and Scott, you write somewhere in the book that there were some high-level meetings at which you don't name the person, but a prime minister of Canada or an ex-prime minister of Canada had said that, why is BRAC going overseas? Has it solved all of Bangladesh's problems?
So he took great umbrage at that one.
Right. And you know, I think so for a scholar of a post-colonial world, I think that's a real victory. And we love that story. But also to say that, you know, that kind of victorious post-colonial moment is not, I think, gives a certain kind of different definition if you look at BRAC's history and trajectory to what internationalization means and what it may mean, and what it may mean for local and global knowledge, because we hear these words a lot bandied around these days, right? And I think BRAC shows you that from very early on, it resisted the kind of orthodoxies of established knowledge, be it embedded in Bangladesh or be it externally imposed internationally in terms of coming up with development solutions. But it always embraced research, evidence, the willingness to work together, collaborate, wherever that was coming from. So I think there's a certain spirit and ethos of working together and doing things collaboratively that are sort of in that story that's very powerful. So as much as we say, well, you know, from the global south, we can do what the north can. Yes, maybe not, we don't know. But I think beyond the rhetoric and you know, the celebration of the rhetoric, I think there's a powerful story about connections, the global and the local, that are part of, you know, what it means to be international today, what it means to be global today. And I think BRAC represents that very nicely. When we come back to the university, you know, we like to think of ourselves as a proud local institution, as a proud Bangladeshi global institution or university. And what might that mean? That can mean so many things, right? But I think, again, if we were to draw from the BRAC example, I think it would mean that, you know, we are very much rooted and embedded in the Bangladesh story and very invested in taking that story forward beyond the boundaries of Bangladesh, perhaps even. But we never do it in isolation. There is a question, there is a very important story of inclusion and partnerships and collaborations that have been part of BRAC's legacy. BRAC has never shied away from it. And in the university, it continues to be part of, you know, the ongoing, the university is young compared to BRAC now, it's just 20 years old. But I think it's an important part of how the university sees itself and its aspirations going forward. Within the university, my research as an anthropologist of Islam is, and I've said this to all of you, for a long time before I came into senior management, my research area was somewhat of an outlier because, you know, BRAC and then the research that BRAC University conventionally thought of doing was very development oriented. What it was about the very poor, bringing about, you know, material changes, hope to their lives and what goes into it and how do we measure those outcomes. And in the early years, actually not even in the early years, in the 1980s, BRAC schools that were very invested in bringing girls into education, into primary education, got a lot of backlash from Islamists. So, schools were burned down. There were, sort of anti-BRAC propaganda that was going around in rural areas, and some religious clergy were spearheading that BRAC is going to take away your faith, right? Because your faith entails girls staying at home and getting married at 10, right? Mm-hmm. So BRAC, as an organization that had to do its work on the ground, has traditionally kept away from the religion question simply because it might get volatile, unless, of course, religion can come to play a role which understands that we are part of a global community of human beings that have certain kinds of needs. So when I started working on Islam, and I came to BRAC University just as a teacher to begin with, actually, of course, as an academic institution, the teaching of religion, the teaching of a sociology or an anthropology of religion is, of course, what we would be very happy to have in our curriculum. But in terms of what that kind of work may mean for mapping the terrain of religious actors or the religious world, or trying to do something that's inclusive and developmental, even, if you will, for the religious world, that's not something that BRAC necessarily had thought about or wanted to think about. But I have to tell you, when I started to do that work, and I've engaged, and my major partner was the World Faith Development Dialogue out of Georgetown University. And then through them, I've actually engaged with Notre Dame as well, the Madrasa Discourses program that we've piloted in Bangladesh to work with madrasa teachers and graduates, I think very much fits within the interdisciplinary, but also the spirit of inclusion that BRAC, even if it didn't work with religion, the way it worked with women, the way it foregrounded women, the way it worked with indigenous languages in how it took primary education to communities that not only had access to schools, but didn't have access to the Bengali language. So I think, in that kind of spirit of inclusion and bringing people in towards education, towards development, and towards thinking about what a collective community life might mean. And also learning that within that process of developing that collectivity, there will be fractures, there will be fissures that we can't do a lot about right now, and that these things take time, but that interventions are actually also necessary. And so my work on faith, on Islam, and in Bangladesh, in drawing a variety of faith actors into a conversation without necessarily changing them or changing their spirit or essence, and what that might mean for Bangladesh moving forward, I think is an important question for Bangladesh, and I think is one that, in the spirit of inclusion and participation, BRAC and BRAC University would be happy to house.
Good. Thank you very much. We have time for one more round before we need to adjourn. We know how vast as the BRAC is, as the world's largest NGO, with so many programs, obviously in Bangladesh, but also in other parts of the world. I'm going to ask each of you to choose one program that you would lift up as particularly exemplary and innovative, effective. I'll begin with Scott, because you've observed and participated in many of these programs, certainly know about them. If you had to choose one that stands out as particularly innovative and effective.
I mentioned the graduation program.
Yeah.
The graduation program is in some ways the culmination of the BRAC story, because it was, I mean, it's what you said. It's in the 1990s there was research. BRAC did its own research and looked and saw our own programs are not reaching the poorest of the poor, right? So by our own standard, by the standard we set at our foundation, the ethos was the most marginalized people in society needed to be included in development. By that standard, we are failing. And an entire new methodology and approach was developed for that. So I would say that. I would also there's a program that I referred to it earlier. It's called Adolescence Empowerment and Livelihood for Adolescents, and it's the Adolescent Empowerment Program. That's interesting because it was developed mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. It wasn't just invented in Bangladesh and then exported. Really, it achieved its greatest success in African countries. So those are, you asked for one, I give you two.
Okay, great. Mashtak, what would you say? What would you choose?
Well, I may be a little biased, and I'm sorry for that. But the one that I would really recommend and for scaling up, not only within BRAC but also beyond BRAC, is research. And we have seen in BRAC how research has contributed to achieving what BRAC is now. And if we take the example of the graduation program, for example, all the changes that have been made in the program since it was started in 2001, most of these were because of the research studies done there. So the program that you have seen in 2001 and the graduation program you have now, there is a huge kind of difference. And all those differences have been happening because of the contribution of research to sort of identify problems and find ways of addressing them.
Thank you very much. Michael, what would you say?
I'm going to cheat. I'll be brief, but there's just so much to think about here. Actually, it's the BRAC programs that are yet to come. BRAC as a learning, adapting organization, non-governmental organization. There's tremendous need to take the ultra-poor graduation on the road, so to speak. Now people are coming off agricultural labor, the training to find jobs in and around the villages, really crucial. Also, Bangladesh has advanced, and I think this is also true of other parts of the global south where they are BRAC is active. They've advanced. Mashtak did so much pioneering work with UNICEF on oral rehydration therapy and just saving children's lives. But now they're in the next level where they need advanced medical care. Village headman, when I was last a couple of years ago in the village, he was having heart problems and died on the way to the nearest hospital. There are no AEDs like we have in every building here at Notre Dame. They don't exist. This level of healthcare is the next step for BRAC. And finally, I'll go back to a reverse phenomenon, the tried and true education of the poor. There is a woman in the village where I do research by the name of Miriam, who was a student at a BRAC school. She got married outside the village. The marriage didn't work so well, so she was divorced and went back to the village, as is the custom, and then got remarried in this village. She's like the anchor. All these other people going out of the village, it's these women that have been through BRAC education. They don't have high school degrees, but some will get high school degrees. That has to keep going because the village will survive, but it will be this new generation of women that I'm convinced will be the leaders in rural Bangladesh. And it's as a result of BRAC's educational programs. So I cheated.
That's okay.
Well,
Samya.
I'm going to cheat now and say that for me, and this is probably unbiased because whatever I do in life, I'm first and foremost a teacher. So it's education. It's the education program. And if you look at the trajectory, it starts with adult literacy, the Freirean model, to how that can be adopted into a primary education system, which really makes the BRAC school stand out from what anybody was offering back then, not just in terms of providing access to the poorest, but also that the education model had to be joyous. It had to be fun. It had to be play-based. And that has, remained and seen extensions later on. Scott, you write about the Lego play labs, right? Where then early childhood education could come in and play labs. We had the Lego Foundation invest, 100 million? Perhaps?
A bunch of money.
A bunch of money, yes, to developing play labs in refugee camps and amongst the most vulnerable as a way of educating children. So I think the BRAC education model, if it starts with adult literacy up to the primary education and then extending onwards, is very bespoke. They were very audacious. They didn't have to go by standard rules of the qualifications a teacher needed to have, or what a school should look like, or the facilities it needed to have. They were just very innovative. They played to the needs of the moment, and the results, because the approach was innovative, the results were staggering. And for me as an educator, to go back to the BRAC schools and to watch the determination and the spirit of the teachers and the students is really quite inspiring, other than the fact that it's a big development imperative. And I say education because an extension of that, and I've said this before, has been the university. So I wait for what, innovation in the years to come might mean for higher education and bringing more and more people who are outside the pale of what higher education might deliver and what it might give to them, bringing them in to education and higher education and what that might mean for Bangladesh and what that might mean perhaps for the world, who knows, perhaps educating madrasa teachers where, nobody knows what to do with them kind of a thing, and they need to be left on their own. Maybe we innovate and come up with a model that can do that, or whoever else, or refugee learners, or, I don't know, sex workers, bringing them in, all kinds of vulnerable populations, marginalized populations, what higher education can do for them, and also reinvent and rethink higher education in the coming years.
That is an appropriately hopeful note for us to end on. I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Mashtak Chowdhury. Mashtak, what time is it in Bangladesh?
It's 10:30 in the evening.
Okay, well, we are grateful, sir, for you joining us virtually at that time of night. Thank you for being with us. I want to thank the folks who have come here to Nareem and are here with us, Samya Huck, Dr. Michael Bowler, and a word of congratulations to you, Scott MacMillan, for the book and for convening us and so many others to get this story out, because it's not as well known as it should be. And that is all the fault of Sir Abed, apparently. Thank you, Scott. I also want to thank the Pulte Institute for hosting this event, Raymond Offenheiser, and to all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mashtak. Bye. Good to see you.
Thank you.